just so everybody kind of understands, when you say self-sacrifice, what do you mean? What do you mean by that? Let's elaborate a little bit on that.
Well, I think for me, being a leader was always instinctive. I was lucky. I grew up around a father that ran his own business and had a lot of employees, and I grew up around an uncle that had his own business and had a lot of employees. And being somebody that even as a young man, starting work early and wanting to be a leader early, being the oldest of five in a very strict household, always being a captain in sports teams, being put in charge of people as a young adult, as a young man, definitely forces those qualities. But as I've gotten older and been in different positions of leadership in my life, and the things that I always thought came easy to me and should come easy to other people, um, you understand that when people don't have a similar background as do I have, it's not as, what's the right word? I can't assume that it's easy for other people, because what comes easy for me is just because I was thrown into the mix of being forced to be a leader early on. But what I mean by self-sacrifice is if you're an older brother, to however many brothers and sisters you got, the first thing you learn is self-sacrifice, because you're responsible for your younger brothers and sisters. You're responsible for that group. And it teaches you that sometimes you might have to throw yourself in front of a punch or throw yourself in front of a problem that one of your siblings may have. And, I learned self-sacrifice before I even knew what the word was, so I was blessed that I was taught that by my parents and by my uncle and grandparents, that self-sacrifice is the first part of being a good leader. You know, Other qualities that have to come along with that are, that a lot of people take for granted is empathy. People that don't have kids, people that were never an older brother or sibling, people that didn't have responsibility early on, don't understand the quality of empathy. And it's really hard to lead other people, manage other people, and direct them and get them to do what you want, get them to relate to you without understanding self-sacrifice and without having the ability to be empathetic for somebody when they're going through a specific situation. Um, and I know whenever when we have these talks, it's the way a lot of this information is going to come across, is that it's going to be all over the place. So as you're bringing certain dialogue out of me, obviously, I'm going to run off in different areas. But, I think right off the bat, even when you're interviewing people for positions, interviewing people for management, upper management, those are qualities that you try to discuss and talk about without actually being direct, because you really want to see if that person that's sitting across from the table from you is talking, like this on a Zoom call or something like that. You want to see if people even have that understanding right off the bat. And I'll tell you, as I've definitely grown in management and, the longer I'm in leadership positions, it really shows um, when somebody has been put through a lot of responsibility at an early age. I can usually spot that in somebody very early, and it has nothing to do with age or maturity level. Sometimes people are just dialed up to have those qualities of leadership, and they may not even know they had it. Back when we started working together, you were designated to have that kind of ability. But I think when I met you, you didn't even know that you had a lot of those qualities and ability. But I sensed that in you from one of the first times I met you, because you were already acting like an older sibling to the other employees in your store. Um, it's hard to describe, but I can see those traits in people at a very early age, and it just comes from being put through some responsibility early on. But definitely that self-sacrificing quality is the most important, because a good manager is not going to get people to follow them if the people that are following them sense that the first time you as a leader come under pressure, you're throwing them under the bus, or
Right.
you're not defending them.
Hmm.
And I think from our time working together, one of the biggest things that I was able to be successful at was, taking the verbal beatdowns and the directions that I was getting from my superiors and never really putting that onto the
Yeah.
people that were subservient to me or were working for me. And that's a form of self-sacrifice, always going above and beyond for the people that are working within your team.
Yeah. I think those are really good points, because it's not just, I remember that was one of the things that we talked about, was being able to withstand a lot of the, what upper management brings to you, and not letting your teams feel the effect of that. That I think that's one of a very, very key thing, because it's your job to essentially shield them, like you said. And I think it's the other point too is it's interesting. because we live in today in an age where, right, data helps make decisions, but at some point there's still a human element. And when you have like the way people interview people nowadays is there's questionnaires, there's personality tests, there's, they're going to ask various questions to get different things out of you. But at the end of the day, like you can't tap into a leader and you can't see their potential just off of that. A lot of times it comes down to instincts and just having that it factor, being able to identify one, but also seeing what they're like when they're put under pressure of a situation. Because you and I both know, we've interviewed plenty of people in our time. An interview is an interview. You can put as much pressure as you want on somebody in an interview, but they're just trying to impress you, So at the end of the day, it's what happens when things get tough, right?
Yeah, and I mean that's why I think any true leader, as they're developing themselves, I always had problems when I was given a script that I had to interview with, because I real quick found out that I had a good perception of when somebody could be a leader or not. Mm-hmm. And it usually came from more open-ended questions that you can't even read off of a chart, because it actually happens systematically as you're engaging in conversation. It was always very hard for me to work off a question strip. There might be a few good questions on there that I would, want to gather some information for, but when you're really trying to find out if somebody's, especially when you're hiring for any type of leadership position, you almost have to go off script and go off instincts, because people are there. People get prepared. I mean, you and I both know, however many interviews we had to do, people could get prepared with scripts for interviews. Like, oh, here's what they're going to ask you. These are general questions. So I'd rather not ask any of those questions, because I don't want to see somebody prepared. I want to really throw stuff at people and see how they respond to it. To your point, that's really how you're testing how somebody can handle things analytically when they're put under pressure. And that's always what shows people's true colors. I mean, that's in life, that's in relationships, that's in work, that's in sports, it's in everything. Is people's true colors come out when they're put under pressure.
Right.
So I think you and I both appreciate, I actually appreciate when somebody will throw tough questions at me and not read off of a script, because, that's how I lead.
Yeah. It's when I interview people, actually I had, boss in another job, and he was trying to prep me for an interview, and he was like, send me, ask all these questions. I was like, I'll ask 2 or 3. I'm all about just learn on the fly. And then you end up coming with, like you said, very tough questions. And I've interviewed a lot of people where they're like, wow, this is a hard question. And then you see them in that pressure situation where they're actually trying to think, because when you come with, like you said, just scripted questions, a lot of people already know how to answer some of those things. You're like, tell me a tough time and, where you, where you were up against the wall and, what did you do? Like, people already have that rehearsed for themselves, so you got to get them on the spot.
Yeah. I think back at some of the better interviews that I was actually involved in, where I was the person being interviewed. And I remember distinctly that there's a few questions that you can get asked that when you answer them a specific way, usually the person on the other end of that table pauses because they're blown away, that you give that response, and one of them definitely always is that when somebody's interviewing, for a upper management position, that, when you basically tell the person sitting across from you, like, a true manager is working for his people. They're not working for, technically you're responsible for them and they have to do what you say, or you're the one directing them, but you ultimately are working for them. You're trying to extract the proper amount of work out of them by learning enough about them and knowing what makes them tick and knowing what makes them, want to work harder and do better. And, it's all about that. It goes back to self-sacrifice. You really have to understand that as a leader, and not everybody's there to serve you. You're there to serve a leader. And I think that's what's wrong with, we're not going to go that route, but that's what's wrong with the political system. These people are put into office and, originally those positions were self-sacrifice positions. You get put in charge of a town or a city or anything. You're there to sacrifice and work for those people, not them slave and work for you, right? So all leadership is tied in. We can even, do it with life coaching. It even comes down to a good relationship, right? As a man, you're dialed up with self-sacrifice. You're there to self-sacrifice for your family, do whatever it takes. And that's why it's so important in the proper structured relationship to have your significant other be supportive of you taking that leadership role and be supportive of, this is how to make a good relationship work.